welcome to the third episode of the MMA Roundtable. You might notice we're on Ustream this week instead of Blog Talk Radio, all through dealing with what they were trying to serve us. So we're on Ustream. You can follow us on ustream.com/channel/the MMA Podcast. And this week, myself, Chris, Ray, and Patrick are going to be breaking down UFC on FX5. Handful of awesome fights. So let's get into it. And like I mentioned before, we are now on Ustream, so we have a new call-in number, a new website that I mentioned before. The new call-in number is 213-457-3380. You should be able to see that on our video feed. You always can tweet us at MMA Mental or at the MMA Podcast, visit our websites, and listen to us every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and I'll hand it off to Ray Thompson to plug MMA Mental.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a good show lined up this week. We've looked at getting some guests on. So last week we spoke to Lockdown MMA. We had 6 of their fighters on at the same time, which was quite interesting because it's something me and Patrick hadn't done before. And we've got a few of their guys on again this week. And I've also, on top of that, I'm also in talks with 4 guests. I'm hoping to pull all 4 of them off, but it's one of those things where you never know till last minute. But we're in talks, and they've all agreed to be on the show. Just got to sort out the final details with UFC veteran Jess Leardon, who fights out of the UK. Former Pride Fighting Championship veteran Enson Inoue. I'm personally quite excited to speak to him. And 2 guys who are currently on the UFC roster. Seth Brzezinski coming off of his big win against Simeon Thoresen, and Joey Beltran, who we know can take a punch, and he's coming off of his loss against James Tahuna, where he showed a ton of heart. Back to you, Jake.
A tune of heart.
A tune of heart.
And yeah, our podcast, we actually had to cancel last week's show, which is the main catalyst of why we moved over to Ustream. Blog Talk Radio had given us problems over and over and over, and like a battered girlfriend, almost like a Rihanna, we kept on going back. We were going back after abuse, but finally, last week's episode, Chris and I were actually talking to nobody for 45 minutes until we realized that our channel was literally broadcasting some random dubstep song that, according to Blog Talk Radio, they play whenever the feed is down. So we were talking to nobody for 45 minutes and realized we were done. Took quite a bit of figuring out, but we're happy to be on Ustream. Hopefully our first few episodes aren't as bumpy as Blog Talk was. We're still getting used to all the software, but you can listen to Chris and my podcast, the MMA Podcast, every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We actually were going to have Nate Quarry on last week. We hope to get him on this week. And future guests also include Joey Coco Diaz, Michael Chavello, and Henzo Gracie. Really looking forward to that. Woo! And like I mentioned at the top of the show, if you'd like to join in on the conversation, we got a new phone number. It's 213-457-3380. And also, happy Columbus Day to all of our American listeners. I personally had work off to celebrate the genocide of millions of Native Americans during Christopher Columbus's and the Europeans' descent on America in the 1500s. So thank you for killing all of those Indian people, Christopher Columbus.
Well done.
He gives Christopher's a bad name, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, and we'll get straight into UFC on FX5. There before we actually get into the fights, there were a lot of fights that were scrapped. There was the Dennis Hallman fight. Hallman weighed in over, and due to personal reasons, actually, unfortunately, is going through a custody battle with his ex-wife, I believe. Unfortunately, he's been let go by the UFC. Shane Roller also got the axe after UFC on FX5. And the Jeremy Stevens bout was canceled as well. Pretty strange stuff there. It seems like the Minneapolis PD had a thing against him because Stevens had been in Minneapolis for a few days. and they decide to arrest him the day of the fight on an outstanding warrant from 2011. Really kind of crappy that his fight had to be canceled, but so it goes. I guess none of you have much to say about the Jeremy Stephens fight.
I got tons to say about that, but I'm not sure who goes when. I guess I'll go first. Yeah, that really sucks. It seems kind of shady that they would go out of their way to, make a statement against him on the day of, doing it. And it's nice to see Dana White standing by one of his fighters. And I mean, ultimately, Yves Edwards loses out. He didn't get his fight. Jeremy Stephens obviously has a kid and a wife, and now, he's in jail, or at least was at the time. It sucks for everyone. That was going to be an amazing fight, so I just hope he gets it sorted out. And, Dana actually talked in the post-fight press conference about making a deal with the DA, and then they came back with a new deal. He agreed to that. Then they came back with a new deal, and it just kept on getting worse and worse. So hopefully, this isn't a precedent, and I just hope everyone can work everything out. And yeah.
Well, it didn't suck too badly for me, because I like to have a bet on the card, and I always bet a tenner on different parts of the card, and I bet a tenner on the prelims. And as it was, I mean, I picked Jeremy Stephens to win that fight, but I got all of the 6 prelims right, so I didn't have to wait for Jeremy Stephens' fight, and I ended up winning £140. So I personally wasn't too disappointed for that reason. But obviously, it was a shame to see the fight scrap, because we lost, like you say, we lost 2 fights: Hallman, Tavares, and Stephens and Edwards. But it just seemed a bit of a mess, didn't it? To be fair, because even like when the fight card had started, they still didn't know if the fight was going to go ahead or not. No one seemed to know what was going on. But it's one of those,
it really wasn't. It was an unfortunate situation, and Dana White had said in the post-fight press conference that Yves Edwards, he was backstage, he had his hands wrapped, he was ready to go for that fight up until, I believe Dana White said, like 35 minutes before the main event. They told Yves Edwards the fight wasn't going to happen. Dana White was very complimentary of Edwards, saying it's veterans like him that helped build the sport, which is really true. He just came to fight. And he said that Edwards was going to get, I believe, at least his show money. So that was a good, classy move by Dana White. And, like Chris had said, the Minneapolis PD, and I don't know which PD was really jerking him around, if it was the Iowa PD or the Minneapolis PD. But he said that they had so many deals, that they had a deal where they were going to be like 2 armed police officers that would take Jeremy Stephens from prison to the arena just to have his fight, and then escort him right back to a jail cell. And apparently that's the deals that they were going to do. Yeah, and they still didn't let it happen. Who knows why? And guys like Floyd Money Mayweather, they get to pick when they go to jail, but very unfortunate situation. They knew the guy was going to be in Minneapolis. He was there the day before. He weighed in for the fight, all that stuff. Just a very unfortunate set of circumstances.
Yeah, it definitely was. So, without focusing too much on the fight that never was, which, Stephens coming off a couple losses against top lightweights, and Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone. Yves Edwards coming off a loss of his own against Tony Ferguson back at the end of 2011 at the TUF 14 finale. It was going to be nice to see one of these guys get back on a winning streak, but unfortunately we will have to wait. But one fight that did live up to its potential was Diego Nunes versus Bart Palashevsky. Fight of the night. These 2 featherweights came out to bang. Surprisingly, it went the distance. Bart really has an iron chin, but Diego Nunes pretty much controlled the entirety of that fight from bell to bell. On my card, he won the first, second, and third rounds. 2 of the 3 judges saw it the same way, and I thought it was definitely deserving of the fight of the night honor to give both of those guys, I believe, $40,000. Man, that was a barn burner.
It was a fantastic fight, and you're right, it definitely deserved fight of the night. No, and it was actually a really good card. There were some other good fights as well. But I, for one, was surprised at the fight, because I really thought it was going to be a bit like some of their last fights in the UFC, not necessarily with each other, obviously, but a bit of stand and tag. But Nunes come out so aggressive, and right from the off, he went for the kill. And like you say, Bart did well to hang on in there. But it was a fantastic fight. But for me, that's the best we've seen Diego Nunes in the UFC. I think that's the best he's looked. I was at his fight live against Dennis Seaver, and it just didn't live up to the hype. It was very cautious, and it was a point affair rather than going for the win. But he certainly, if he's been criticised in the past for that, he's certainly come out banging this time, and it was a brilliant fight. And I was glad it won Fight of the Night as well.
Yeah, it really was a spectacular showing. Like you guys said, Diego Nunes came out uncharacteristically aggressive in that fight. He must have had Bart Palashevsky rocked in the first 30 seconds of that fight. He just came out like he really had something to prove, and he really looked like he was going for the finish. I think he's been to the decision at least 6 or 7 times in his last fight, so he was trying to get the stoppage there, and Bart Palashevsky showed a ton of heart, though. He looked out of his game. I don't know if, maybe he was as surprised as all of us when Diego Nunes came out the way he did, and, he was hurt so early in that fight. It was really Diego the majority of the way. In the third round, Bart looked pretty good. At least he had Diego stunned from some good shots. And he kind of tried to turn it into a fight there, but it was just, a little too late. He had to get the finish, and he had Diego hurt, but he just couldn't get it. Truly a good fight, and I'm not disappointed with that as Fight of the Night.
Yeah, I've been watching both of these guys for a very long time. Bart Palashevsky I watched all the way back in his IFL days, and he's one of those guys that has always brought it. Every single fight he brings it, and I've had a lot of respect. Diego Nunes, I've enjoyed his performances in the past. I've watched him all the way from the WEC till this current fight. And for a guy that has a nickname, The Gun, he seemed like a cap gun in there because he did throw awesome techniques, but he didn't really have the killer instinct that you'd expect from a guy at the highest level. Most of his wins were by decision. His losses were by decisions. I mean, you could always count on a decision in a Nunes fight. This is the one where, it was a decision, but man, he came out like a bat out of hell. He was throwing massive overhand rights. He wasn't throwing a lot of his kicking techniques like he usually does. He was a man on fire. And I think to expand on what Ray said earlier is that in the Nunes Seaver fight, that was Seaver's debut. So Seaver, came in there, didn't want to lose again after, being dominated by Cerrone. So it was a very cautious fight, and it was just really nice to see guys put it on the line, and absolutely 100% it deserved Fight of the Night.
Yeah, and I was actually about to make the same exact point that it was about time Diego Nunes live up to his gun moniker. As far as these guys' next opponents go, I think with the featherweight that division ever expanding in the UFC, both guys have a lot of possible opponents. As far as Bart Palashevsky, a bunch of pretty game UFC featherweights coming off losses. You got Dustin Diamond Poirier. You got Mark Hominick, who I believe is fighting Pablo Garza pretty soon. You have Ross Pearson, who had that recent loss against Cub Swanson, who will be taking on George Soteropoulos. And on the other side, I really think this moves Nunes up into the top 10, maybe even the top 5 of the UFC bantamweights. Trying to think of guys who are there with him. You obviously have Ricardo Lamas, you have Chad Mendez, Dennis Seaver's probably going to beat Eddie Yeagan beginning of December. Two featherweights I was thinking of who are currently in Bellator and one fighting championship, who I think the UFC really need to bring over stat, because they are 2 fighters at the top of the featherweight division, are Pat Curran in Bellator and Tatsuya Kawajiri in one fighting championship. I'm not exactly sure their current contract status, but there's no one in either of those promotions except maybe a Daniel Strauss in Bellator that I see giving either of these guys a problem. And maybe have Curran and Strauss fight. I don't know their contract status, but maybe get the winner in UFC, because featherweight probably has the most talent that's outside of the UFC at the moment.
It's difficult to say next because there's so many guys up towards the top and up who are around the same kind of standing in the featherweight division, and you also seem to see you have one guy who wins and then he loses his next fight because it's such a topsy-turvy division because there is so many good fighters. But you mentioned some good names there. Some other names to throw in the hat for Diego Nunes, Eric Koch. I mean, he was supposed to be fighting Jose Aldo, and of course, he's had to pull out for the injury. You know, you've had Frankie Edgar come to featherweight as well. We don't know what's going to happen with him next. For someone coming off a loss, a name just trying to think of names you didn't mention. Charles Oliveira, he comes off a loss to Cub Swanson. Versus Bart Palazescu would be a pretty good fight. But I think there's that many great fighters at the featherweight, especially towards the top. There's quite a lot of exciting matches you can make, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Diego, I agree with your sentiment that he's got to be in the top 5 there somewhere. If I recall correctly, from his WEC and UFC career combined, his only loss was to Kenny Florian. And, Kenny Florian, a title contender, like 3 different weight classes. So no shame in that there. He had a huge advantage at 145, and Diego, he even dropped him really hard first and third rounds of that fight. So the victory like he put on Friday night, you got to put him somewhere in the top. I would like to see him against. They're good fights, like you guys said. Korean Zombie. I'm just trying to think of who's got matches made right now. There are so many tentative matchups. Like Ray had mentioned, Eric Koch was supposed to fight Jose Aldo, but who knows what's going on with that now. So Koch versus Nunes, that's a good prospect. There's a lot of ways to go with that. I'm not sure who I would specifically like to see him matched up with, but definitely someone towards the higher end of the UFC featherweight spectrum.
Yeah, we're Max Holloway. You guys are talking about a lot of really top-level guys that, Nunes should get a shot at, but I also feel that Holloway is kind of a safe bet in Nunes' next fight, because if you put him up there against any of these top guys, I don't see Nunes beating any of them. If you build up a contender, I think that you need to give them the right path. I mean, John Jones had how many fights before he actually fought for a title? I think that Nunes versus Holloway is a perfect stylistic matchup. I think it'd be nothing but a barn burner, and I think not only would it give Nunes to prove that he should hang with the best, but it gives Holloway the chance to actually get himself up there in the echelons. So I got my money on Max Holloway.
Holloway would be a pretty interesting name too. He's one of many featherweights out there. It's a pretty stacked division now, probably the most stacked of the 3 new weight classes: flyweight, bantamweight, and featherweight out there. Moving on to another stacked division in the welterweights, we had Mike Pierce take on Aaron Simpson. And I'll admit, I was wrong. I said it was definitely going to be a boring, unanimous decision. Both guys known for a lot of wrestling acumen, a lot of decisions. But man, Mike Pierce put Aaron Simpson down with an early knockout in the second round, 29 seconds in. Definitely a knockout of the night nominee. Michael Johnson also had a pretty impressive knockout, so I'm not going to stand out there and say one was definitely better than the other. But big ups to Mike Pierce, who, look at his record. He's really got an impressive slate. His only UFC losses coming to top welterweights: John Fitch, Johnny Hendricks, and Josh Koscheck. And the Koscheck and Hendricks fight were both split decisions. Pierce really put a stamp on this one. It was his first non-decision win since he beat Kenny Robertson at UFC 126. So I'm sure it felt really good for him to go in there and finish a fight. And yeah, what did you guys think of that early second round knockout? I'll pass to you first, Chris.
Well, Mike Pierce, I have a lot of respect for. He has gone up against Johnny Hendricks. He's gone up against Josh Koscheck, and he's come up short in those fights, but they were fairly decent. So he obviously has the skill set to hang with the best. The issue that I have is
He relies on his the John Fish fight. Who can forget? UFC 107. He was the person who came closest to finishing John Fish out of UFC. So it just seemed like he has been more reliant on his wrestling technique than actually, evolving his skills. I mean, he has a submission in the UFC against Amilcar Alves or something like that. He got a key lock on that gentleman. But otherwise, I just thought that maybe he's been wrestling a little too much. And Aaron Simpson has fought through really talented guys. I mean, Tom Lawler, Chris Lieben, he fought at middleweight, came down to welterweight, fought Kenny Robertson, and looked pretty decent. So in this fight, I wasn't really too sure. I figured it'd be a decision. Aaron Simpson looked absolutely fantastic in that first round. He was just dominating, controlling. He rocked Mike Pierce for a long time. I mean, hit him with a hard shot, followed it up with some tie knees. It looked like it was going to be all Aaron Simpson, and then Pierce walked back to his corner, and he looked fine. He sat down, took some water. He was taking his instructions very well, and he came out, and Aaron Simpson ducked right into a punch. Perfect timing, perfect placement. Mike Pierce wins by KO, and that this should just going to show you that maybe putting yourself more out there and taking some more chances is definitely what you need. Definitely a contender for knockout of the night, and Mike Pierce looked great.
This was a crazy fight, because I mean, whenever we do these fights, whenever we see these fights coming up, and we all make our picks on the MMA Playground, and we all look at the fights, and you have a vision in your head of how this fight's going to play out. Well, I know I do. I'm going to assume you guys do as well. And for me, this was going to be a boring Mike Pierce controlling Simpson unanimous decision. I thought Simpson looked really bad in his first fight at welterweight, and Mike Pierce, regardless of whether he looks good or not, he's always competitive, and he seems to be one of those guys that's just as competitive against the top guys or the lower ranked guys, but he always looks good. So I honestly thought this would be a straightforward fight for Pierce, but Simpson looked awesome in that first round. And Chris mentioned about the punches, but what about the slam? I mean, to get underneath Pierce like that and pick him up, it was Matt Hughes style, and he got him right up and then slammed him down. It was just amazing to watch. It was a hell of a performance, and then the turnaround at the start of round 2 was unbelievable. And I know obviously we had quite a good few TKOs. It wasn't just the Pierce and the Johnson one, but again we all pick our bonuses afterwards. And I don't always agree with the UFC. Sometimes you think it should have gone a different way, but I personally felt for the KO that it should have gone to Mike Pierce. But it was a fantastic fight, and I think even though Simpson lost, he still comes out of it with his stock raised a little bit for me because of the performance in the first round, and Pierce comes out of that fight with his stock raised a lot, because I think that's possibly the best he's looked in victory in the UFC, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Ray. And, talking about the Nunes-Palashevsky fight, I said I wasn't upset with that being the fight of the night. But for my money, Pierce and Simpson was my fight of the night. It wasn't as long, it wasn't as extended an affair, but that first round, to me, it was just stupid even. And these guys, they came out just ready to blast each other. And I was very surprised when this was made the opening fight on the Facebook card. Just for myself, I don't view Aaron Simpson or Mike Pierce as just pure wrestlers. They're not going to John Fitch you. They're not going to Ben Askren you. Both, especially Aaron Simpson, he's got some good TKOs on his record. So when they came out there, of course, Mike Pierce, he's more of a clinch guy, and it started out beautifully. Pierce had some good clinch elbows. Simpson was landing a lot of good standing strikes, and like you guys mentioned, he rocked him real hard. Big punches, big Muay Thai knees. And he just looked like an absolute beast. Slammed Mike Pierce like no one has before in his MMA career, I'm sure. And he looked like a real beast at 170. And the knockout, though, that Mike Pierce got, it was really reminiscent to me of the CR Bahadurzada fight when he knocked out Paulo Thiago. It was one of those shots. It was so short, but so quick and so hard, it was barely perceptible until you got certain angles, just exactly how hard that Aaron Simpson was hit. It was just a brutal shot. He was out pretty much instantly. For me, if I'm Dana White, I give that fight of the night to Simpson and Pierce, and I give knockout of the night to Mike Pierce. It was a fantastic fight, and like you guys had alluded to as well, you can't knock him too far down the ladder for that fight because he really did look amazing. And Mike Pierce, he's just as tough as they come. He's never been finished, and just a fantastic scrap all around. And truly, when I was watching that fight, I said, this is the exact reason why I love the sport of MMA. It was out of control.
Yeah, it really was out of control, and one of the things that would have added to your argument about making this fight of the night, I think most people thought Aaron Simpson won that first round, especially because of a big double leg slam he got toward the end of it, and Pierce rolled back, and in less than 30 seconds in the second round, just lands that perfect short right, rushes up with another couple punches, and the ref was able to separate Pierce from the defeated Aaron Simpson. As far as future opponents, for Aaron Simpson, I think a good matchup would be against Claude Patrick, 3-1 in the UFC, coming off that one loss against Brian Ebersol at UFC 140. Before that, he looked pretty good against Ricardo Funch, James Wilkes, and Daniel Roberts. And I think it would be a pretty good test, the Arizona State wrestler taking on the Canadian Claude Patrick. As far as Mike Pierce goes, I agree with all three of you in that this really ups Pierce's stock a lot. I would say he's undoubtedly in the top 20 of UFC welterweights, which is not an easy thing to do. Maybe even top 15. I don't know if I would throw him into that top 10 mix yet, because the top 10, you have, your Condit, your Campman, your St. Pierre, Diaz, Ellenberger, Hendricks, Koscheck, Penn, and McDonald. That's a really, really stacked top 10. But I would really like to see Mike Pierce take on James Head, who just defeated a top wrestler and Brian Ebersol. He was on a crazy win streak. I think he'd won 12 or 13 fights in a row. And that would be a really good test for both guys. Ray, like you mentioned earlier, Pierce is one of these guys who seems to fight at the level of his next opponent. And Pierce versus James Head, normally I would give this to Pierce without thinking twice about it, but Head looked very, very good against Brian Ebersol, and that would be an interesting scrap.
Yep, absolutely. I definitely think it would be an interesting scrap. As far as Mike Pierce and future opponents, you're looking at 1-0 guys with good track records, and not too many come to mind. I was actually thinking if John Fitch loses against Eric Silva, which I have a good feeling he will, I would actually like to see. I'd like to see John Fitch versus Aaron Simpson, which was supposed to happen a while ago. So that's excuse me. That's pretty much all I have in the way of future opponents for both guys. Pierce should get a mid-level guy, and I think Simpson should kind of just wait a little bit, reassess everything, and then if the cards align right and Fitch loses to Silva, make that fight.
I'd like to see Pierce get a bit of a step up from Simpson. Obviously, we've got coming off this card as well, we've got Jake Ellenberger, who we're going to talk about later on. But I'd be happy to see Mike Pierce versus Jake Ellenberger. Or if you want to give him a stiffer test, give him the winner of Rory McDonald and BJ Penn. As for Aaron Simpson, I don't know where he goes from here, really. I think Simpson's one of these guys that's never really lived up to the hype. I think when he first joined UFC, big things were expected, and then of course he got blasted by Chris Lieben. Maybe someone like Dan Miller would be a good fight for him. I mean, I'm a big fan of Dan Miller. I think it'd be a really good test. They're both known for their wrestling, but I think Dan Miller would have the advantage with the jiu-jitsu side to it. So yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing Simpson versus Miller.
Yeah, those are some really interesting matchups, guys. And for myself, as far as Mike Pierce, I'd like to see him take on, I'd say maybe the winner of Rick Story versus Damian Maia. Both are very well-respected guys at the 170-pound weight class in the UFC. Rick Story, a fighter not that unlike Mike Pierce, solid wrestling background, good striking game, just iron chin. He can take a savage beating as well as he can give it. So I think that'd be a good style matchup. And of course, Damian Maia, that would just be an interesting match for the more clinch-minded Mike Pierce. It'd be interesting to see what happens with that fight if Maia could work his game. And of course, he's got the ever-improving stand-up himself. So I think either of those would make good matchups. And as far as Aaron Simpson, I would like to see him, stay at a fairly high level at the 170 division. Of course, if he were to get an easier test in his next fight, that's understandable. I do think Aaron Simpson, I don't want to label him a gatekeeper, but he's definitely not at the top of the division, but he is not a lower tier guy. He's got a really great skill set, and he can cause a lot of problems for a lot of guys. We saw, maybe he got a little overconfident after the first round of the Pierce fight and just kind of rushed in. Who knows how that, what really happened with that. But I could see him taking on the loser of John Fitch versus Eric Silva. Like Ray said, Ray mentioned Jake Ellenberger for Mike. But yeah, there's just a lot of good routes to go for Aaron Simpson. Maybe he could take on Rick Torrey's most previous opponent. His name is kind of escaping me at the moment. But yeah, there's some good stuff that they could set up for Simpson.
I totally agree with that. And before we move on to the Michael Johnson-Danny Castillo fight, which was very similar to Pierce Simpson in that Castillo, I thought, won the first round, and then Johnson roared back in the second with an early knockout. Looks like we have some breaking news coming in from BJPen.com. I'm not sure if it's confirmed yet or not, but it's looking like Strikeforce is going to shut its doors. Which pretty much means, at least to me, that the top fighters on Strikeforce's roster, like your Daniel Cormier, your Gilbert Melendez, possibly even the women's divisions, Dana White has hinted. Well. Yep, Rockhold. Dana White has hinted about bringing the women's 135 and 45-pound divisions into the UFC. So yeah, Strikeforce officially shutting down, and hopefully we see these fighters and divisions get absorbed into the UFC. Ray, you were actually the one who brought this news to us just a minute ago. What do you think as far as the Strikeforce roster, at least? What do you think the implications of this are going to be on the UFC?
I think personally it's awesome news. When I look back over the history of the UFC, I mean, I love the UFC like we all do, and I love all the fights we get to see, but there's always been the big excitement, the big buzz when we've seen them take over a smaller organisation or another organisation, and it's led to some super matchups. And we saw it when they took over Pride FC. We finally got to see the likes of Shogun, Nogueira, Mirko Krokop, all these guys that we've been waiting for to see, Vanderlei Silva, Dan Henderson, Rampage Jackson. They all finally joined the UFC. Now that was awesome. And then more recently, within the last 2 years, we've seen WEC. We've got to see the likes of Benson Henderson, Anthony Pettis, Donald Cerrone, obviously Danny Castillo, who obviously lost this weekend. But the first three for sure, they've had a massive impact on the UFC lightweight division. We've got to see some of the best featherweights join, Jose Aldo. And then we've also seen the likes of Kenny Florian and now Frank Edgar get to drop down to these weight classes where they wouldn't have necessarily before because they didn't get the same exposure in WEC. But who's not excited at the prospect of these Strikeforce fights coming over? The likes of Daniel Cormier, Josh Barnett, Luke Rockhold. There's so many names to mention. Gilbert Melendez, Josh Thompson, who was in the UFC before years ago. And you talk about Ronda Rousey. Now they give her she's had quite a bit of airtime really with the UFC. She's been on The Ultimate Fighter. They always show her in the crowd and they always big her up as the women's champion because she is awesome. These people deserve to be in the best organisation in the world. They deserve to be in the UFC. I can't wait personally. I'm really excited.
Chris?
Yeah,
I shut you down, son.
No, go ahead, Patrick.
Take
you're
over,
already
sir.
on the thread. No, go. You first, sir. You first, go.
Well, thank you, sir. Sorry, I really hope this rumor is true. Just since the acquisition of Strikeforce, I've liked Strikeforce as an organization. It's been around for a long time, but they could never compete with the UFC. They put on a couple good fights, but the heavyweight Grand Prix was a huge debacle. We just saw a Strikeforce card cancel not too long ago. The most current one they have coming up just has a ton of injuries coming its way, and I think just the Strikeforce thing has really been poorly executed since the Zuffa bought it. I was hoping Strikeforce would turn into more of a feeder league where they would build up prospects and then bring them to the UFC. It hasn't worked that way. They've signed like maybe 2 or 3 fighters, but then most of the other guys are just coming to the UFC. And they put on just a few shows every year. So I say good riddance, quite frankly. Bring in all the good guys, and everybody else will just, say sayonara.
Is it my turn, Patrick?
Oh, it's your turn, Chris.
All right. Yeah, you can't try and solidify the UFC as the premier MMA organization in the world and get it to be at NFL, NBA, NHL level, MLB, without getting rid of these like minor leagues, man. You can't have a minor league run by the same company try and spend all the effort and energy into those promotions and then try and tell everyone that your mainstream one has the best, because you have 2 contending, promotions with different champions owned by the same company. As far as a business goes, I'm not even well versed in business, but to me, as a super fan, that makes absolutely no sense. It hasn't made sense since day one. When I thought they bought it out, I thought like Ray was saying, they were just going to merge it into the UFC, and slowly they've been doing it, champion by champion, bringing over Overeem and Diaz and all these guys. But ultimately, I am very happy to hear this. They're going to bolster the roster even more and give us more things to talk about here on our podcast network. So it's fantastic, man. I'm looking forward to some dream fights.
Yeah, and it definitely is not confirmed yet, but we can only hope with these major MMA news outlets broadcasting the rumor that we're close to seeing it shut its doors. It kind of makes sense. They had 2 big fights coming up. They had Cormier versus Frank Mir, and they had Melendez versus Healy. Both of those fights we're looking at being canceled. Healy versus Melendez obviously canceled because that injury to Gilbert Melendez, and an opponent for Daniel Cormier still in the works. I'm thinking of all of the current Strikeforce champions. You have Cyborg and Ronda Rousey, obviously. You have Gilbert Melendez, Nate Marquardt, Luke Rockhold. I really don't know which fight I'm more pumped for. Obviously, I think of those fighters, Rousey and Melendez are the most obvious to give title shots to, which I guess not really Rousey, because there isn't a current UFC women's champ. But the 2 things that I take from this is, A, the UFC roster is going to be expanded tremendously with guys like Rockhold, Marquardt, Melendez, all of the title contenders at those weight classes, along with, I guess, if Strikeforce does fold and close its doors, I guess that's a sure sign that Dana White's going to be opening a featherweight and bantamweight women's division, which he has hinted for probably the last 3 or 4 months. He's a big fan of Ronda Rousey. He's called her a rock star. And I'm really excited to see this expansion of the UFC, which them owning Strikeforce for so long, it was only a matter of time, and sooner rather than later. I'm very, very glad this is happening.
Yeah, guys, I think we're all on board with that general sentiment. It can only help to grow the sport and the UFC brand.
Yeah, anyone have any more thoughts on the acquisition of these Strikeforce fighters. I guess it doesn't really mean anything with the women coming over to the UFC as far as fights we would want to see made, because obviously it's just going to be the Strikeforce women's rosters being moved over to the UFC, presumably. As far as the men go, what fight do you want to see the most? I guess this brings Daniel Cormier in the whole conversation with the top UFC heavyweights. Maybe we can see a Rockhold Weidman to decide who Silva fights next, as Weidman kind of sits on the shelf waiting for a title shot. You have Nate Marquardt. Personally, at least for me, I would want to most see Gilbert Melendez fight the winner of Benson Henderson versus Nate Diaz. I think that would be an amazing, amazing fight. I'll pass it off to Chris. What men's fight would you most like to see with all these Strikeforce fighters coming over into the big show?
Well, to kind of pontificate, that's a word, right? Pontificate, that is a word, yes? I'm not sure.
I'll let it slide.
Okay. Well, your dream fight of Melendez versus the winner of Diaz-Henderson won't happen if it's Diaz, because they're, Stockton, 209, they train together. They'll never fight each other. As far as a dream fight, I'd love to see, there's quite a few of them, actually. I'd like to see Rockhold versus the winner of the next middleweight title fight, and I'd like to see Cormier fight the winner of Dos Santos and Velasquez. And yet again, we have kind of a crossroads where Cormier and Velasquez are, training partners and good friends. So I'm going to have to go with Rockhold versus the next middleweight title fight winner.
What do you think, Ray?
I'll tell you what I'd like to see. There's been talks of, because of obviously Daniel Cormier's, working relationship with Cain Velasquez, there was talks of him dropping down to 205. And if he drops down to 205 after winning the Heavyweight Grand Prix, I'd love to see him get a title shot straight away at John Jones. I think that would be a phenomenal fight. And I think he could actually beat John Jones.
After the way he handled Josh Barnett, I wouldn't be shocked.
Amazing. What he did to Josh Barnett was amazing. I mean, Josh Barnett is tough as nails. And I'm sure at one stage he picked Josh Barnett up and slammed him on his head. Who does that?
Yeah, that was an insane fight between Cormier and Barnett for the Heavyweight Grand Prix Championship. I really like that matchup for Cormier and John Jones. That would be something. Cormier is a very solid heavyweight. I mean, he's kind of a Pat Barry type of heavyweight, just 5'11", 6 foot even, but like 265 pure pounds. He's just as stout as they come. So if he can get down to 205, I think that'd be a great fight with him and John Jones. He's got that Olympic caliber wrestling, and when you have those Olympic level athletes and your super high level grapplers or strikers, sometimes you're in a different class really of skill set. You just have that just a little edge. So that'd be fantastic. As far as other fights, we got Nate Marquardt, just recently became the Strikeforce 170-pound champ. He put on a great fight with Tyron Woodley. I'd like to see him take on someone maybe of the GSP caliber, or Carlos Condit, Nate Diaz perhaps, Nick Diaz. I'd love to see that fight actually, Marquardt and Diaz. There's just a real slew of good fights that could be made. I just can't wait to see what they put together.
Yeah, and I guess in the coming days, if this indeed is confirmed, Dana White's usually pretty good about immediately responding to rumors coming up. We'll see that entrance of the women's division. We'll see Ronda Rousey, who, in my opinion, has the most impressive MMA record as far as rising to an elite level. Not only winning every fight in the first round, winning every fight by submission, winning every submission by armbar, and with the exception of the Miesha Tate fight, winning every fight in the first minute. She's absolutely dynamite, and like I've heard Dana White say before, I think Rousey versus Cyborg could be the fight that that actually draws a lot of mainstream attention to the women. Right?
Unbelievable. Ronda Rousey is phenomenal. I mean, her fight with Miesha Tate was amazing, but then watching her against, was her last fight Julie Kedzie?
Tate's last fight was against Kedzie. Rousey's last fight was against Sarah Kaufman. Yeah,
that was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
That was incredible.
Mind you, the Miesha Tate Julie Kedzie fight was amazing as well for different reasons. I mean, them two women were brutal. They showed so much heart in that fight. It was unbelievable. I think that was one of the fights of the year, personally.
Yeah, that was a spectacular fight. Miesha Tate, she showed great heart in that fight. She showed why she was a former champion, getting dropped with that head kick late and, coming back, showing her good grappling skill set. And she just took over in that fight. And as far as Rousey goes, you know what? And let me just say about women's MMA in general. I love women's MMA. Ronda Rousey, Marloes Coenen, Megumi Fuji, Kat Zingano. There's a million different great women fighters out there. And I've wanted Strikeforce to bring the women's division into UFC. But I'll tell you what gives me pause about wanting to see the females in the UFC just yet. And that is Shannon Knapp has created Invicta Fighting Championships. I'm sure a lot of the listeners out there are familiar with this promotion, and they are really doing big things with women's MMA right now. It's a WMMA exclusive promotion, all female fight cards. They just had their most recent card this weekend, and it was fantastic. Great fights top to bottom, and every show they have put on has just been a barn burner. And in fact, their second show, their server was crashing because over 250,000 people were trying to view the event at the same time. So they had to buy better server space and everything like that. They really look like they're making moves. And personally, I would just love to see. I'd love to see that promotion grow. I'd love to see it flourish. If for no other reason than just so that all the different divisions could get just a little more fleshed out. As some of us have talked about before, the Ronda Rousey versus Chris Cyborg Santos, if that fight gets made, be it 135 or 145, you're kind of setting yourself up for an anticlimactic kind of situation. After that, it's kind of what do you do? And then you kind of have to wait. You're building prospects. Prospects are getting title shots when they perhaps shouldn't. I would love to see UFC hold off on bringing in the women's divisions, but, if it's an eventuality, then, I know it's an eventuality, but if they want to do it sooner rather than later, hey, that's fine. They'll just have to build it like they've been doing with the 125, 35, and 45.
Just talking about what you were saying about Invicta FC, I've got to give a shout out to one of the ladies that fought on that card, who's from the UK. And it's one that we spoke with quite a while ago on our MMA Mental podcast, and that's Joanne Calderwood. I mean, she looks like a real prospect. She trains out of the Dinky Ninjas gym in Scotland, and do you know what? I think she's going to be one for the future, one to look out for. She's got a Muay Thai background, but she can do it all. She's such a good fighter, but she had a really impressive win at the Invicta FC over the weekend as well, so I think she's certainly one to watch.
Yeah, she certainly is, and I believe you can follow her on Twitter at Bad Mofo Jojo.
That's right, and she is a bad mofo.
That's for sure. Where'd Jake and Chris go? I'm sure.
Hey guys.
Yeah, I was
MMA Mental's taking over.
You guys are doing so good. Just keep on doing what you're doing.
Thanks, gents.
But, Chris, did you want to put a final thought in on this women's MMA rant before we move on to Michael Johnson versus Danny Castillo?
Sure, I'll keep it short, and by that I mean a 3-minute rant. Patrick, that was a beautiful analysis, man. I was really, kind of like intrigued with that. Very well put. You guys have some awesome points.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Women's MMA. I talked to Miesha about it when we had her on the MMA podcast, and I basically told her that I was actually sickened the first couple times that I watched women's MMA. It was just really gross to me. I mean, obviously it's just, social conditioning. I'm like, why are these, girls fighting each other? But, after a certain amount of time, you grow to respect it. You see some really just awesome fighters with beautiful technique. And Misha had a lot of amazing things and just candid things to say about being a female fighter. She's glad to be in the position that she is, and proud to be a woman and proud to, to really show her skills. And I think that it's about fucking high time that women get their fair shot at glory, money, and stardom. And the only way that's going to happen is if they're in the UFC. Strikeforce can only take you so far. Being on Showtime is great, but that's just a limited audience. Can you imagine if we had a Fox or a Fuel or an FX fight card with women's fights on it? It's really going to give them the exposure that they need. And I'm officially co-signed with y'all, and I think it's high time.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with Chris and Patrick both there. Patrick in that Invicta is doing an amazing job, but kind of to switch over to what Chris is saying, you're only going to get hardcore MMA fans going to Invicta's website, watching the web stream, etc., etc. Really, as far as the mainstream introduction of women's MMA into the sports scene, you got to be on TV, and you pretty much at this point got to be the UFC as far as them with their Fox contract. Fox has obviously really been the only network to put a lot of eggs in that basket, even though we did have a couple Strikeforce events on CBS. I feel like that whole scuffle between the Diaz's and Shields and Melendez against Mayhem kind of made CBS want to back out of that MMA world. But Ronda Rousey is the perfect candidate to get women's MMA on the mainstream sports scene for so many reasons. I mean, she's outspoken, she loves the trash talk, she's active on Twitter, active on social media, really, really personable, unless you're fighting her soon. She's obviously started to become a sex symbol. She's been in the ESPN The Body magazine. Really, really, really beautiful girl. And on top of that, like I said before, she has the most impressive record I've seen, man or woman, ever in mixed martial arts. So that whole kind of combination is a perfect storm. I'm really looking forward to seeing Strikeforce move over into the UFC if the rumors are indeed true. So I guess without any further ado, unless one of you guys want to cut me off and add in one final thought, hey.
Yes, I've got quite a tangent I'd like to go off on as well. Although it's regarding Danny Castillo and Michael Johnson's fight.
Oh yeah, well
Jake,
we will get to you in 1 second. Yeah, that Michael Johnson Danny Castillo fight, knockout of the night. Although it could have gone really to either one. The Pierce or the Johnson fight, and both of them were similar. Like I mentioned earlier, Castillo really was having his way with Michael Johnson, took him down, was holding him down. Michael Johnson came out like a bat out of hell, knocked him out a minute 6 into the second round. Johnson was coming off wins against Tony Ferguson and Shane Roller. Before that, obviously, he had that October 2011 loss to Paul Sass, while Castillo was on a 3-fight win streak of his own against Shamar Bailey, Inja Kawani, and John Cholish, all actually within the last year. He's fought 4 times within the last 12 months, which is something that I really, really love seeing in fighters. The way Castillo was having his way with him, I really think that if they were to fight 10 times, Danny Castillo would win 6 or 7 of those. But Michael Johnson, man, he unloaded on Danny Castillo and into the fight with the knockout of the night.
Yeah, and what a knockout it was. It was really beautiful. Castillo came the second round and he threw I believe it was a right leg kick he went to throw, and Johnson, he just countered perfectly with this left over the top. Again, it wasn't, it didn't look like the hardest punch in the world, but if you just look at the accuracy, the placement, the timing, just coming over the leg kick when he just had no way to defend himself, he put it right on Castillo's jaw, And, he went down and he followed up with a great ground and pound that just put him to sleep. And going into that fight, that was probably the hardest fight of the card to call, I feel. MMA Playground, everybody's favorite fantasy MMA website. It was the hot bout on there, which meant it was the closest to 50-50 out of all the thousands of people who play that site. So that right there just gives you an idea. When you got a couple thousand MMA fans and it's almost 50-50, it's an even matchup. And it certainly was. Both guys came in looking real good. Castillo on his 3-fight win streak and Johnson on his 2-fight win streak, like Jake said. Both had looked like they'd been making improvements in their game. I thought Johnson was going to win. I saw it being more of a unanimous decision type of affair, although I still felt it would be exciting. But gosh, Danny Castillo, he showed why that was just such a hard fight to pick. He came out and he showed where his improvements had been made. And again, also where this kind of parallels the Simpson Pierce fight is just that even the man who suffered defeat in this fight, Danny Castillo, you can't knock him too hard because he put on such a great performance, and he's really proven himself to be a commodity in the UFC lightweight division, as well as Michael Johnson.
Ray?
Sorry, I thought Chris was up next.
Oh, yeah, that was me. Sorry, guys. Sorry, I was so deep into the conversation. Michael Johnson and Danny Castillo, two wrestlers in the lightweight division who I've never been sold on as far as like real top contenders. Danny Castillo has put on a few runs in his career where he's dominated some guys. Hasn't been much of a finisher. Michael Johnson has been kind of up and down, and that first round was, it was all Castillo, just complete 100% domination. And then Michael Johnson came back and finished that fight with, the cherry on top of that sundae, man. He blasted Castillo, hit him with a couple more shots, and put him out. I think that it was definitely a great finish. I personally feel that the Mike Pierce, Aaron Simpson fight should have been knockout of the night. That's just my personal take. But Michael Johnson really showed that he can come back from the brink, and I think that's an intangible that goes a long way in mixed martial arts. I mean, if you spend literally 4 minutes of a fight getting dominated and you come back to win by a finish, obviously you should have some praise. That was absolutely fantastic, and I'd like to give both guys a shout out. Good job, fellas. You put in a good fight, and it was true mixed martial arts. We didn't get any submissions necessarily, but we saw a hell of a show.
Shout out.
Props. Right, my turn. Now that Chris has not fluffed his lines.
Wait, did you just call me fluffer,
Christopher?
Call me a fluffer?
Right, first of all, this was a crazy fight, because again, you play this fight out in your head. I had Michael Johnson keeping the fight standing and winning on the feet, but Danny Castillo was tough to finish. I thought it'd be an exciting unanimous decision. Now, the way Castillo come out at the start of the fight was unbelievable. He rocked him on the feet, he dropped him, he took his back, he had his hooks in, he was looking for that choke, but Johnson hung on in there. It was, he did well to hang on in there, but the way that fight was going, it was going to go to a Castillo decision, which is, again, I didn't really see coming. But Johnson just come out in that second round, and he just had the power to finish the fight, and Castillo was out. Again, I felt that Pierce should have won knockout of the night, as I said earlier on. But what stood out to me is Michael Johnson has got to be one of the most improved fighters at the moment in that lightweight division, because he come off the Ultimate Fighter. Now he was good on the Ultimate Fighter, but he didn't stand out for me as someone who's going to be around for a long time. He looked okay. When he fought Tony Ferguson, I think a lot of people thought he was going to lose that fight, and he completely smashed Tony Ferguson. But it just seems to be getting better and better every time we see him. I mean, other than he's lost to Paul Sass, and we've obviously seen Paul Sass go on a good run of late up until the Wyman defeat, Johnson has just looked really, really impressive. And I don't know. I just think he's going to make waves in this division. I think there's more to come from him yet. And with talking about his improvement, it reminds me of Kenny Florian, because when Kenny Florian came off Ultimate Fighter Season 1, he was just ordinary, and then he just put this crazy run together where he basically went straight up to the top, and he beat some of the best guys, and went on to fight for titles. I know he never won, but he had some really good title fights. But yeah, I can see big things for Johnson because I think he's still quite young as well, I think.
Yeah, Johnson, like Florian, coming out of the Ultimate Fighter season. God, I don't even want to guess what season he was a part of. It was
same season.
It was GSP versus Koscheck, right? Yeah. But yeah, as far as opponents for both of these guys in the upcoming future, as we do for all of our fights, as far as Danny Castillo goes, I personally like to see him take on the loser of Mac Danzig versus Takanori Gomi. Both of these guys are bigger names than Danny Castillo, so it could help him out a lot. And I think fighting either one of these guys, he would actually have a decent chance. And as far as Anthony Johnson goes, I really agree, Ray, with
Johnson.
Or wow, Michael Johnson. I'm not racist. As far as Michael Johnson goes, I think this puts him into the top 20 of at least UFC lightweights. Thinking about who he should fight next, I don't know necessarily if I want to match him up against the guy with the acumen of, say, a Jim Miller or a Matt Wyman, but, maybe see him take on Jacob Volkman, who also won at UFC on FX6, perhaps the winner of Rafael Dos Anjos versus Mark Bocek. Lots of interesting matchups. One of these guys, we aren't really sure exactly where his stock lies with the UFC lightweights. Patrick? Did we lose Patrick?
Oh, no, you know what? I was so mixed by the fact you stole my Jacob Volkman pick. That was exactly who I was going to nominate Michael Johnson to take on. It seems like a natural progression. Volkman, to me, he showed again this past weekend why he's a super high level grappler. His wrestling skills, maybe more so than grappling, just looked outstanding. And he was just manhandling Danny Castillo and really every opponent he faces in the UFC. His grappling is just another level. It's smothering. He's all over you all night. It's so much so I think he's actually a almost kind of an entertaining fight. But I'd like to see Michael Johnson take a step up the ladder there. Maybe not too far. As for Danny Castillo, again, I don't think his stock dropped too far. I'd like to see him take on, maybe Jeremy Stevens when he gets his issues all sorted out.
Maybe Volkman can give Michael Johnson a glassectomy, just like he wanted to do with President Obama.
Yeah, perhaps.
God, what a fucking dummy that Volkman guy is. But as far as matchmaking goes, that's great. And if you use the foolproof method of MMA math, you'll remember that Volkman actually fought Castillo and dominated Castillo, who's a pretty decent grappler, for 3 rounds straight. Got him in, I think, an unprecedented, 12 arm triangle chokes, just kept on squeezing it and releasing, squeezing it and releasing, and then you look at what Johnson did to
Castillo. That game.
Yeah, squeeze and release. Absolutely. That was, a fantastic fight. So, co-signed, I think, Michael Johnson versus, Jacob Volkman is great considering they're both on one-fight win streaks, and I think that's a solid matchmaking right there.
Just to say, Michael Johnson's on a 3-fight win streak now.
Yeah. I was testing you, Ray. You passed.
Yeah. I just want to say, I do not want to see Johnson versus Volkman, and here's the reason why. I want to see Johnson on the main card. I never ever want to see Volkman on the main card. I can't stand him. He fights boring and he talks shit. The guy is an absolute flipping knobhead. I'm just not interested in seeing Volkman fight at all. Johnson, I think he's earned his step up in competition. He asked for a step up in competition. I wouldn't give him a Jim Miller. I think Jim Miller's too much of a step up. But I wouldn't mind seeing him against either Matt Wyman or Joe Lauzon or a good stand-up fight, Malvin Gillard. And as for Danny Castillo, that's a bit more of a tricky one. do we want to give him another guy on who's lost a fight? Maybe Paul Sass, two good grapplers. See if we can get Sass back winning ways. Feed in Danny Castillo.
Perfect.
That would definitely be pretty interesting as well. Yeah, it was a fight. Like I said, I wouldn't necessarily drag Castillo's stock down too far, even though he did get knocked out, and it was the knockout of the night. He dominated that first round. I actually gave the first round 10-8. Looked really impressive versus Michael Johnson in that first frame. So, I think maybe a matchup between any of the people who you threw out there or who I threw out there would be pretty interesting. So unless we have any more thoughts on the Michael Johnson Danny Castillo fight before we get to Justin Edwards versus Josh Neer, or do you have something to throw in really quick, Patrick?
Yeah, just when you mentioned that first round being 10-8 for Danny Castillo, I could definitely see that. And I also want to say the first round of Diego Nunes versus Bart Polashevsky, maybe it's just me, but if that's not a 10-8 round, I don't know that one exists. That was pretty much just a pure curb stomping for 5 minutes and with very minimal offense for Polashevsky. And Polashevsky's my boy. Love that dude. Always puts on a great fight. I picked him to knock out Tyson Griffin in the first round in his featherweight debut. But yeah, that was a 10-8. And to see that was 30-27 for Diego Nunes, except for the 129-28 scorecard, that's just astounding to me.
I totally agree with that. The next fight on the docket to get to is the welterweight match between Justin Edwards and Josh Neer, submission of the night fight. But before we do that, like we do every week, it is time for Guess That Tweet, and this week our host is going to be Chris. So,
defending champion,
Chris, without any further ado, I will let you take it away, buddy.
All right, fellas, are you ready to step inside the proverbial octagon?
We are live!
All right, gentlemen, prepare yourselves, because shit just got real. First tweet. When did Baby Spice become the hot Spice Girl? She is looking good. Your options are Rashad Evans, Chris Clements, Ben Askren, and Sean McCorkle.
I'm going to say Sean McCorkle.
Ooh, McCorkle seems like a good choice, but I'll mix it up. I'm going Chris Clements.
I'm kind of in the same boat. I want to say Sean McCorkle, but part of me thinks, wait, why is Chris on this list with a bunch of more well-known fighters? So, like P Money, I think I'll go with Chris Clements.
Drum roll, please. Correct. Chris Clements is the answer.
Woo! Suck it, Ray.
Have won.
Suck it.
The Americans are getting off to an early lead.
Ray, all this shit talking
USA.
is not doing you any
USA.
good.
USA.
False sense of security, boys.
All right, here we
Just
go.
building up our hopes.
Round 2. Some people really can't take a joke or me being a smartass when they do or say something stupid. Jesus. Your options are John Fitch, Ariel Helwani, Joe Rogan, or Ian McCall.
Ariel Helwani.
Oh, what was the first option again there, Chris?
I'll read them back to you guys. John Fitch, Ariel Helwani, Joe Rogan, or Ian McCall.
Ooh, that is a tough one. I will have to go with, I'll go with John Fitch.
Okay.
You know what? I want to say Rogan doesn't care enough to post anything like that. He probably gets hate tweets 24/7, so I'm sure he doesn't mind that much. John Fitch and Ariel Helwani, I can't picture either of them even making a joke. So, I think I'm going to have to go with Ian McCall.
Drum roll. Ian McCall is the correct answer.
Woo!
Pulls ahead
Suck
with 2.
it, suck
Ray
it,
has
suck
a measly
it.
0. Patrick has 1.
This game's rubbish.
This is not a conspiracy, by the way.
Okay, gentlemen, round 3. And this is actually my favorite one of all of them. Abs on a skinny guy are big hammers on a fat chick. It really doesn't count. # true story.
Wow, that's awesome.
Read that one again.
Abs on a skinny guy are big hammers on a fat chick. It really doesn't count. True story.
That's amazing.
Okay, your options are Ryan Jimmo, Alistair Overeem, Harold Howard, and Kevin James.
That's a tough one.
That's some blooming different types of people. I'll go with Kevin James.
Ooh, I will take Ryan Jimmo.
You know, I sort of think you only threw Alistair Overeem in there because you have a crush on him, Chris. But for the sake of picking someone new, I'll go ahead and pick Alistair Overeem.
Drum roll. And Patrick wins another point. It was Ryan Jimmo. Jake and Pat are tied for first place.
USA.
Ray has basically no chance at winning.
Do you know what I've just worked out? You 3 are all in the same bloody room in America. I'm over in the UK. You 3 are cheating. Patrick gets it right this time, then Jake, then this time you both get it right. You're all sitting next to each other, you're showing each other the cards.
After you crushed us so bad last week, we had no choice after you just steamrolled us last week, Ray.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Be more productive, Ray, and start winning.
I'll have to stop whining.
Okay, here we go. Next one. Now, this one I think is probably the hardest one out of all of them. Maybe. So, here we go. Great day. Great day today. Horse ride with the girls, then barbecued caribou. Now eating s'mores out at the fire pit with the kids. You guys got that?
Yeah.
You want me to?
I got it.
You guys got it?
Yep.
Your options are Misha Tate, Brock Lesnar, Big Nogueira, and Dan Henderson.
I'll go Dan Henderson.
Yeah, you know, I hate to do it. I hate to take away any hope Ray has of winning this game, but I think I'll have to take Dan Henderson as well. Although my first reaction was Matt Hughes.
It was Henderson, Tate, and who else, Chris?
It's Henderson, Tate, Lesnar, and Nogueira. Big Nog.
Well, it's not in Portuguese, so I'm going to rule out Big Nog, unless you translated that. But I'm going to go ahead and rule out Nog. I don't think Tate has any kids, so I'm going to rule out Misha Tate. And Brock Lesnar, I don't see him eating meat unless he's like covered in blood and he's like ripping up raw flesh on his own. Plus, I'm pretty sure he's probably on a strict fiber diet after getting a foot of his colon pulled out of his rear end. So, as much as I want to stray from Ray and Patrick, I think I'm also going to go Dan Henderson.
And Jake and Pat are tied with 3 apiece.
Whew.
And Ray gets a point on the board. So we've got Jake with 3, Pat with 3, Ray with 1. You know what? Actually, we could have a 3-way tie if things go crazy. I've got 6 tweets total. We've got a sudden death 6th tweet. So let's see what happens here.
Ooh.
All right. Next tweet. Sorry to say, but the UFC is missing something. Hope the main event is worth watching. And this was during, I believe, UFC on FX5. And your options are... Do you guys want me to reread that, or you're good to go? You guys good? Okay. Your options are Miguel Torres, Frank Shamrock, Rampage Jackson, and Anthony Johnson.
Frank Shamrock.
You know, that's a solid list of people who are just hating these days.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Just solid.
Why do you
haters.
think I did it, dude?
Just a good list, top to bottom. I mean, who's the most butthurt and bitter at their stage of this career to fucking poo-poo the FX card this past Friday? You are mentally deficient if you think there's anything wrong with that card. Jesus Christ, I'll say Rampage.
Yep. When Chris first read it, I was like, all right, who is butthurt with the UFC? And all those guys have legitimate butthurt moments. Anthony Johnson, thinking Rampage a little bit, but screw it. I'll go with Frank Shamrock.
Drum roll. You guys ready? And Patrick wins!
No!
So basically, just so you understand, MMA Mental wins again 2 weeks in a row.
I knew I should have gone with my gut.
Like
but, hey, you all have got to host the next two, and then you'll be outnumbered 2-1.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
check this out, you guys. We're going to do the sixth one just for shit and giggles. I took the time to look it up. We're going to do it. Let's do it. All right? Maybe Ray could get another point and feel better about himself. I don't know. You ready?
Bring it on.
Okay. All right, guys. I think I came up with a new word. Swivelriety. Verb. The ability to swivel your hips in jiu-jitsu in an effective manner. Okay? Swivelriety. So your options are Matt Hughes, Javier Vasquez, Ronda Rousey, and John McGuire.
John McGuire.
Javier Vasquez.
I'm going Ronda Rousey just because that's such an awesome mental image.
Drum roll. Drum roll. And Patrick takes it again. 5 points to Jake's 3. Ray's 1.
Wow.
I really
5 for
need to use
6.
my Twitter.
No, that was 5.
Oh.
Missed one.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. 5 for 6. That's incredible.
Well done, Patrick.
Well, thank you. You know, I give all the credit to my ability to detect haters properly. You know, that fifth question, that was just so brutal. If it weren't for my ability to detect who's hating the most, I would have never been able to do it.
Now, what did you think Javier Vasquez? What gave it away to you, or were you just fucking shooting in the dark?
Well, you know, Javier Vasquez, he's a real underrated jiu-jitsu player, and you know, he's put on some good shows, and actually, was he cut from the UFC? I'm sitting here wondering. I'm like, man, when was
Injuries.
When was his last
Injuries.
fight?
Lots
Injuries,
of
there it is.
Yep, he was cut.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Probably due to the injuries. Yeah, that was what it was. Just
That's awesome, man.
You know.
And big ups to P Money, who now has 1 win under his belt. Ray obviously crushed it last week, and he has 1 win himself. Maybe next week we'll have Ray or Patrick host, and one of the MMA podcast guys can scrounge up a win somehow.
Let's hope, dude. This is pathetic.
I started strong out of the gate, and then just dropped it.
I'll put myself forward for hosting next week if that's okay.
Yeah, so next week we'll have Ray pick out 5 or 6 tweets, and we will do it again like we just did. So, let's move on to that welterweight fight with Justin Edwards and Josh Neer, which was incredible. Justin Edwards comes out aggressive, swinging at him, and then actually backs Neer up against the fence. Neer reverses, and then Edwards pulls a very, very high guard, jumps guard, puts an arm in guillotine, and finishes Josh Neer in what was very deserving of the submission of the night, 45 seconds into the fight. And Josh Neer has some impressive jits too. I mean, way back in the day, I think it was 2006, fighting Nick Diaz at UFC 62, even though he was tapped out by Diaz, definitely was not, being dominated by him. One of the few fighters to fight both Nick and Nate Diaz, and is actually friends with him now, trains with him. But Justin Edwards, Jesus Christ, looked very, very, very good with that guillotine submission victory against Josh Neer less than a minute in. Chris?
Yeah, that was actually an anomaly. I think that Justin Edwards is a decent fighter. I just think that Josh Neer coming off that knockout loss, obviously he was rattled before that fight. He had a 2-fight win streak coming back, I think, for his 3rd or 4th stint with the UFC. I think that the pressure got to him, man. I think that he knew that he would be on the chopping block. A 2nd straight loss in the UFC at welterweight doesn't bode well at all, considering how many, top contenders and prospects they have in that weight division. As far as Justin Edwards go, his submission was fantastic. He cinched onto it, and as soon as he cinched it up, I just kind of looked at my screen. I was like, oh, okay, it's wrapped up, man. And then Neer dropped down to his knees. I'm like, okay, that made it worse. And then he was out. It was one of those things where you could just call it as it happened. Fantastic victory for Edwards. He's basically just won the biggest fight of his career against Josh Neer.
Yeah, I was really surprised by this fight. This was actually the first fight I picked wrong of the night. I've got the first 6 ones right, and I was actually really confident for this fight that Josh Neer was going to pull out the win. I mean, Josh Neer looked great against Keith Wisniewski. They had a crazy fight. Then, of course, he got tagged by Mike Pyle. But this fight was shocking. I mean, Justin Edwards, the arm and guillotine choke was just amazing. And Neer, being as tough as he is, obviously wasn't going to tap. But he clearly went to sleep, and when he come back round again, he didn't even realise the fight was over. It was stunning by Edwards, a really, really solid performance, and definitely, again, there were some really good submissions that night, but this was definitely worthy of the submission of the night, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I definitely have to agree once again with you there, Ray. It was a fantastic submission, and I got to admit, I had it on the DVR, and I must have replayed it 3 or 4 times just watching Josh Neer come to as Edwards had finished it with the guillotine. He let go, and the ref was there to hold him up and prevent him from dropping and falling on his face or something like that. And really, that referee, I'd have to go back and get his name again, but he was fantastic all night. And I watched him. So he was sitting there and he was holding Josh Neer as he was just kind of kneeling over, just about to collapse, and he just wakes up and he starts looking around. He's got no clue where he is. There's the confusion. I just said, gosh, that was, he's as shocked as the rest of us about that fight. Now, I mean, Edwards was definitely getting underrated. I know I didn't pick him to win, and I think part of that is just, perhaps I got caught in a very common problem, which is, I say, hey, this guy, he's 1-2 in the UFC. He's taking on a top veteran in Josh Neer, and I didn't really look into it much more than that. And perhaps that's why with MMA, you got to look into it. You got to see, the different style choices, and why styles make fights, and and they certainly prove why Joe Silva is a great matchmaker with this one, and why it was the appropriate choice for the main card. And at first I had talked about it with a few different people about how, I don't think this should be a main card fight. I thought easily Polishevsky Nunes or Pierce Simpson should have been main card. I thought there was a million choices that would have been better, but ultimately, I am really glad that this was on the main card. If for no other reason than just to let the people see a really good technical submission. It's just one of the great things about MMA. You can win a fight without even throwing a strike, and that was just a perfect example of it, and a good quick showing.
Yeah, and a technical submission aside from a straight KO, probably one of the most exciting ways a fight can end. Literally, you're so fearless in there, the referee's got to stop it for you before you actually tap out yourself. We actually saw this happen to Neer in 2010 when he fought Eddie Alvarez in Bellator. He did it to Dwayne Ludwig with a guillotine choke earlier this year at UFC on FX. Actually, Neer's last 3 fights have all been on UFC on FX cards. He was on Gillard Miller, Johnson vs. McCall, and now Brown vs. Bigfoot. And as far as who I think these guys should be matched up against next, A guy who won on the co-main event of the last card, UFC on Fuel, Amir Sadollah. I think that would be a pretty interesting match of pretty top-flight grapplers, Near versus Sadollah. As far as Justin Edwards, I don't know if this necessarily vaults Edwards up into the elite of the welterweight division, but at the same time, I wouldn't mind seeing him fight a guy like maybe Seth Basinski. I'm horrible at pronouncing things. Who just beat Simeon Thorson about a month ago? That would be a pretty compelling matchup, Chris.
Thorson? Not too sure about that one.
No. I said I'd like to see him fight Basinski, who just beat Thorson.
Oh, okay, Basinski. Yeah, that would be good. I think that the actual physical tools between those guys, Justin Edwards is obviously kind of short. I think he's 5'8", 5'9", and Basinski is 6'2". He's a massive welterweight. As far as what he brings to the table, Justin Edwards has a very unpredictable striking game. He throws crazy kicks and he's on cool stuff. Whereas Basinski uses his reach. I'm co-signed on that matchup, man. I can't really think of anyone else on a similar win streak who isn't already signed up for a fight at welterweight. Co-signed.
I'll throw out a different match for you. I wouldn't mind seeing Justin Edwards take on Che Mills of the UK. I think they're at a similar standing. I mean, Che Mills is 2-1 in the UFC. Obviously, lost to Rory McDonald. He had an impressive win on his debut. He won his last fight really due to technicality because somebody got injured. But I think that'd be a good fight. Che Mills versus Justin Edwards. I think they're both aggressive fighters. As for Josh Neer, obviously he's coming off 2 defeats now. Thinking of another UK guy who's coming off a defeat, John Maguire, be a good grappling match. They've both got good submission skills. We've got obviously Neer trains with the Diazes. We've got John Maguire's Gypsy Jiu-Jitsu. So there's 2 fights I wouldn't mind seeing.
Yeah, those are some good matchups, Ray. And it's funny, I was actually thinking that John Maguire could actually match up with Justin Edwards. I know that would be a rare fighter with a win taking on a fighter coming off a loss. But I did like what I saw from John Maguire so far in his UFC career. And for my money, I think they're pretty evenly matched in all facets of the game. So I'd actually like to go with Edwards and Maguire. And as far as Josh Neer goes, I hope he's still fighting in the UFC. He's another one of those guys, old school guy, just like Eve Edwards. He pretty much fights whoever, whenever. He's not scared. And he's a great fighter and someone that, a lot of the fighters today, could really model their attitude after, at least in their willingness to fight. So having said that, if he's still in the UFC, I'd like to see him take on, someone like, perhaps, maybe Jay Heron. He's another veteran. Of course, his fight with Jake Ellenberger was a little closer, obviously, having gone the decision. But, that's really all I got at the moment.
Yeah, and luckily Justin Edwards, with that impressive submission, went home $40,000 richer, like I mentioned earlier, with submission of the night. Moving on to the flyweight fight, which I think it was sort of a shame that this wasn't the main event or co-main event. This fight had a lot more meaning in its weight division than Silva Brown had at heavyweight or Ellenberger Huron had at welterweight. This was a definite title eliminator fight, so it should have at least gotten the co-main, especially over the Ellenberger Huron fight that was originally supposed to be Koscheck Ellenberger until Koscheck had to pull out with injury. So all of my butthurtedness aside from that not being the co-main event, which I kept on thinking, like, wait, it isn't the co-main? Like, every single time I think of that fight, I think at first, oh yeah, it's a co-main. Wait, no, it wasn't. Really rare especially on a FX card, to see a title eliminator fight not be main or co-main. But you had John Dodson handing Jussier Formiga, Jussier da Silva, whatever you want to call him, handing him his second loss. He was widely regarded the best flyweight in the world before he lost to Ian McCall in February 2011 at Tachi Palace Fights 8. Luckily, the UFC brought him in from, I think his last fight was in Shudo. And yeah, Dodson's one of these guys who he has evolved so much from being on The Ultimate Fighter. You know, he's lost to no-name guys sort of as early as 2 or 3 years ago. But, you know, his fights against Dillashaw, Tim Elliott, and Jussier da Silva have looked really, really impressive. And you can see how acrobatic he is. I forget if I guess it was after the Dillashaw fight when he literally ran up the wall of the octagon and turned it into like some, you know, double backflip, spinning 360 jump. It was really impressive. Really looking forward to seeing John Dodson fight Demetrius Johnson. He is going to be an underdog, but I've heard a few people so far say that they think he might be able to take the belt away from Mighty Mouse. As far as the fight went, the first round was pretty even, 10-10, but that second round, Dodson turned it on, rushed in there. I believe, you know, there wasn't much time left, with only about 30-40 seconds left. Dodson just followed up with a blistering left hand that knocked Formiga down actually on to his stomach, where Dodson rushed in and finished him Hughes Gracie style, just jumps on his back and hammers away at him until referee Daryl Guthmiller ran in there and intervened to give John Dodson the TKO win at 4 minutes and 35 seconds of the second round. So yeah, we'll see Dodson fighting Demetrius Johnson for his first title defense. I'm looking forward to that one.
I have to say with this fight, I could see an argument for it being co-main event, but co-main, but not main. For me, Brown and Silva was a more intriguing fight, maybe because of the
especially after that stare down.
Oh god, that stare down was ridiculous. I would have just pulled out of the fight there and then if I was Travis Brown.
Yeah, Silva's head I think was at least 3 times bigger than Travis Brown's head. That was ridiculous.
Yeah, Silva's he's a scary guy. As for the fight, this was the second fight I got wrong. I got 2 fights wrong on the night, which was a pretty good event for me. This was the other fight I got wrong.
Nice.
I brought into the Da Silva hype. I really thought he was going to be as good as what we were told, but he wasn't. The first round wasn't a great round. I didn't think it wasn't overly exciting to watch. And obviously in the second round, Dodson made it exciting by getting the finish. I wasn't that impressed with Da Silva personally. I was impressed with Dodson because he got a win and he got a stoppage. And certainly intrigued to see Dodson take on Demetrius Johnson.
Yeah, dude, this was one of those fights where, if you think about it, Demetrius Johnson and John Dodson, it's like Dodson and Johnson Incorporated. You know, it sounds like a lawyer firm, but it was nice to see these kind of unheralded flyweights who both can actually have legitimate, they both have legitimate reasons for fighting for the belt. Jussier da Silva obviously has been kind of on top of the world at 125, and Dodson fought above his natural weight class at 135 and came in there and the first round was a very methodical performance where they were kind of going back and forth, trying to feel each other out. I didn't think it was that bad. And there's actually a story out there where Pat Barry was in the audience about, I think, 1 or 2 rows back, and some 6'6" giant dude was standing up drunk out of his fucking mind yelling, "You fucking pussies! You fucking pussies!" And like Pat Barry got up and like turned around and looked at the guy and looked him eye to eye and was like, What did you say? Can you say that again? What was that? And the dude sat down, took his hat and put it over his head and just like kind of leaned down in shame. So I thought that was kind of a cool story to share. As far as the fight went, the first round was very measured. And then in the second round, Dodson rocked Da Silva. Da Silva fell down, recovered. Dodson let him up, and it ended with the left hook to the body, and then a right hand that missed, and then another left hook, kind of like an uppercut hook that came up and went past his guard and tagged him in the chin, and De Silva turned over and just kind of covered his head as Dodson rained down those punches. It was a very nice ending to a fight that a lot of people were booing, and I didn't really understand that. I like the fight, and we now have a number one contender, John Dodson, who I thought for a long time actually had proper credentials for that.
Yeah, before we pass it off to Patrick, a pretty funny analogy Pat Barry made was calling them roaches. Just they're always going to outnumber you, and as much as you squash them down, they're always going to keep coming. I personally really enjoyed that metaphor. Patrick?
Yeah, and I believe it's kind of going official. That is the new. It's like a live MMA troll. The Boo Birds, they can now go like roaches. So that's always fun. But yeah, regarding the Dodson De Silva fight, I could definitely agree with it being co-main. Probably should have been, just as far as divisional relevancy is concerned. This was a guaranteed number one contender shot. I don't know why this would be below Ellenberger and Heron. But it was a good match. Hussein Silva, his only loss going into this was Eamon Hall, like the guys mentioned. And since that time, he put together a good number of wins, and he really improved his striking game since then. That was the thing. He's always been known for his judo and really for his submission game especially. He's known for getting the back and just not letting go, looking for the rear naked choke. That's always been his style. After the McCall fight, he really tightened up his striking game, turned into quite a nice counterpuncher. So this fight really went just about exactly as I thought it would, at least in the sense, it was a very close fight. And then you have John Dodson, more of a boxer combination, very quick, good power, and it was very measured, as Chris had said. When you have two guys of that caliber going at it, it's for the number one contender shot. We know that in and of itself, number one contender fights, we see odd stuff sometimes. You look at your Nate Marquardt versus your Chael Sonnen fight, or really there's just a whole list we could go run down. It kind of played out exactly as I thought. I kind of thought that Dodson would get the decision, but I knew, he's got the explosiveness in his hands. Speed plus mass generates power. So, hey, there you go. And he's looking to take on Demetrius Johnson, and that's just going to be an insane fight. That should be like 7 rounds.
Yeah, and we all know that's going to be the next title fight. I thought it was pretty funny. Our last MMA Roundtable, we all were saying that was probably going to be the case, and a couple days after, Dana White went and made it official. So he must have been listening and must have been inspired by our podcast. I would talk about who we think Jussier De Silva should fight next. But the UFC doesn't really have too much of a flyweight roster. Plus, we're going a little lengthy tonight. I think we're already an hour 40 in, so we'll try and tie a nice, pretty bow on the podcast in the next half an hour. But lots of guys to choose from in the UFC flyweight division. Still more guys they need to bring in from other promotions like Legacy, like Pancrase, like Shudo, like Cage Fury even. That Joshua Sampo kid in Legacy Promotions, I think, is the real deal. Yeah, we still got a couple fights and a segment to bring you. So without any further ado, let's get to our Boneheads of the Week.
Oh, yeah.
Do it.
And as far as my bonehead, I guess I'll get it going. I have, I'm not sure which exact police department it was. I thought it was the Minneapolis, but it could have been Minnesota or Iowa after I heard Patrick talk about it. But that was a really low move. Obviously, he was at the weigh-ins the day before the fight, and I'm assuming that there are policemen and policewomen there at the weigh-ins to deal with crowd control, and that Jeremy Stephens is going to be at the weigh-ins. Jeremy Stephens is going to be traveling to Minnesota months in advance. So the fact that the police department not only arrested him the day of the fight, but then made it impossible for Dana White to get him out of jail, apparently offering him deals when Dana accepted, pulling him off of the table. It's not only a low move morally, but you realize you're sort of in a way hurting your own state's economy. I mean, taking a fight off of a fight card is going to do nothing for you but take away potential tax dollars that could be coming in to the local economy. So my bonehead is that police department. Chris?
My bonehead of the week is John Fitch. I want to say the last 3 months he's done multiple interviews where he said, oh yeah, the Hendricks fight, I don't want to take anything away from my opponent, but I needed the money and I was out of shape and coming off of an injury. So he basically prefaced every interview or story with, I don't want to take anything away from Hendricks, but, he got lucky because I stopped being vegan. I need to eat more meat and I was coming off of an injury. And that's just such bullshit to basically short sell your opponent who knocked you out in 12 seconds. That's some absolute crap, and I have no respect for that. I think Fitch should just stay quiet and wait for his next match. I mean, he has Eric Silva ahead of him. That's a handful in its own right. So to come out and say those things, I have absolutely no respect for that.
My bonehead of the week this is the weakest of the last 3 weeks. It's the Tough 16 coaches, Roy Nelson and Shane Carwin. Now, we've watched this Ultimate Fighter for years, and it's always an advantage to be picking the fights for your guys. Now what you do is you take your best guy, you put him against their worst guy. That way you get yourself 3 or 4 wins, you get good morale going, blah, 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 blah. But, you've got to do your research. You've got to know your fighters, you've got to know their fighters. So far, we've had the coaches pick 3 fights. So far, every fight they've picked, they've lost. What's going on? Why are they not researching the guys? There's not one fight they've picked yet that they've won. I just think that's mental.
MMA mental.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable.
There we go.
Patrick?
Yeah, my pick for the bonehead of the week is the Minneapolis crowd, more specifically the crowd members that were booing the John Dodson versus Hussier da Silva fight. I don't know if they were aware that this was a flyweight title eliminator fight and that the winner of this fight was going to face the flyweight champion, but that's what happens when you have big fights like this. And even you can look into any other sport. When you're in Major League Baseball, if you've got 2 of the best pitchers in the game, you're going to see a low-scoring event. It's going to be a shutout more likely than not. It'll be a pitcher's duel. You'll go 9 innings. You could go into extra innings. You won't even see a hit. In the NFL or college football, if you like, you have top-ranked defenses, top-ranked teams going against each other more often than not. Heck, it'll be a 3-6 game or, a 2-5 game or just something random like that. Because that's what happens when you have top competition in the cage against each other or in really any level of sports. It's a methodical approach. It's tactical. If you watch someone fight and they've got 16 victories by knockout, you're probably not going to rush in to go and stand and bang with them. You're going to try and take a calculated approach, and you're going to try and work your game the best you can. And, if that includes avoiding the stand-up at all if you want. So that's just, it's mind-boggling, and I don't understand who's going to pay for a ticket to go see the UFC that can't appreciate what they're watching. So the Minneapolis Boo Birds, they're my bonehead of the week.
So yeah, the 4 nominations. I got the Minneapolis PD. Chris has John Fitch. Ray has the Ultimate Fighter 16 coaches, and Patrick has the crowd. Can't vote for our own nomination. I picked that Minneapolis crowd. You know, Barry was within all. You know, he's known pretty universally as a very, very nice and fan friendly guy, and I think it was right of him to turn around and call out people booing, because that was an amazing fight. If you're really gonna stand there and boo an amazing fight, do it at a bar, do it with your drunk buddies who also don't know anything about the sport. Don't do it where you're surrounded by respectful MMA fans booing literally where the fighters can hear you. Just absolutely that is unexcusable. Chris?
Yeah, as far as our boneheads, Minneapolis PD, they're just doing their job. So I can't be too mad about that. I mean, they did pick a horrible time to arrest a guy right before the fight.
F the police!
Yeah, 5-0 Popo. Obviously, I can't pick John Fitch. That's my own. The coaches, I can't be too mad about that either, because that's Dana's problem. They're just being idiots. So I'm going to have to go ahead and say the Minneapolis crowd. Obviously, we've beaten a dead horse here, but if you're going to pay good money to go and watch fights and then, boo fights that you don't think are great, I mean, maybe drink a little less and stop being such a douchebag and have more respect. So I'm going with Minneapolis.
I'm going to vote for the police. And I understand about it being their job, but there's a way to do things. And listening to what Jake said, the way they did that was wrong. They just made a complete mess of it. So that's why I'm going to vote for the police.
Yeah, there's a lot of qualified candidates, and I mean, gosh, it just seems like a classic American justice system screw job. Yeah, they can do whatever they want, basically. Yeah, they have to do their job, but at the same time, we see Floyd Money Mayweather. He gets to make his court date. They absolutely jerked around Jeremy Stevens. They jerked around the UFC. Terrible job. As far as John Fitch, he just needs to shut his mouth. I'm sick and tired of him. He's quite frankly just incredibly whiny for a cage fighter. And you know what? I respect him because he gets the win. Say what you want about his style. Given the rule system in place in MMA right now, he does what it takes to win, technically. So, hey, good for him. But, dude, shut your mouth. You got knocked out real quick. Your boy P-Money predicted that easily. And, hey, that's what happens. And, as far as the tough coaches, I can't hate on that too much just because their stupidity leads to mismatches, which can lead to finishes, which is always exciting. Gosh, it's so tough. I'll say John Fitch. He's the bonehead of the week in my opinion, if I had to vote.
John Fitch, 1 vote for him, 1 vote for the PD, but 2 votes goes for our consensus bonehead, or I guess in this case, boneheads of the week. The crowd at the Target Center in Minneapolis, and I don't want to harp on the situation with Jeremy Stevens too much, but Patrick, you make a really great choice. I don't care if Floyd Money Mayweather is 43-0. I don't care, how much pay-per-view revenue he brings in for Vegas. But you know what? When it comes down to it, if you're going to compare anything between Stevens and Floyd, Stevens was in there for assault, which I don't know if you know what assault means, but this is addressed to our listeners. Assault's basically just threatening someone. If you actually punch or hit someone, that's battery. Floyd Mayweather just served jail time for domestic abuse. And I don't think there's even a question what is worse out of domestic abuse and assault. And the fact that Floyd is picking his jail terms, picking his court dates, and Jeremy Stevens gets brought in the day of the fight. That's unexcusable.
That's all about money, bro. Jeremy Stevens doesn't have tons of money. If you have money, you can pay your way out of any situation. The rich don't really suffer like we do. They don't lose their houses, if they have issues with that. It's just one of those things where, Jeremy is obviously a struggling fighter, so he has to deal with the legal system.
Yeah, and that's terribly sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say it was just really a shame. The whole situation. There's rarely been a situation as transparent in that, where you can look and say, okay, the American justice system and the American government, American society is purely ruled by who has the most cash, right or wrong, does not matter. It's capitalism. It's consumerism. It is, slit your mother's throat for $10. It's fucking disgusting. And, hey, that's what you get. Like you guys said, Jeremy Stevens fighting didn't bring Minneapolis $100 million, so he didn't get to pick and choose when he went to jail. He just got the government hatchet job.
Exactly. Pretty disgusting stuff there, but without talking the topic ragged, we'll move on to the co-main event. Jake Ellenberger defeating Jay Heron by unanimous decision. And I think this mostly went the way people thought it would. I actually scored it 30-27, while all three judges scored the bout 29-28. The first round was mainly standing up. Ellenberger seemed the more spry opponent. Round two, Ellenberger actually got Heron down, grinded him down in Heron's closed guard. And in the third round, Heron wasn't necessarily running away from Ellenberger, but that third round, Ellenberger was stalking Heron the entire time. So I gave all 3 rounds to Jake Ellenberger. Obviously, the judges disagreed, but luckily they gave the fight in a unanimous nod to Jake. Patrick?
Yeah,
there, Patrick? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. The Skype is giving me issues again. Goddamn technology. Anyhow, though, yeah, this fight, it was a good fight. I like how Jake Ellenberger came out. He looked like he was really, he was trying to pace himself for the first time. Generally, we see Jake Ellenberger, he comes out, he's going 120 miles an hour. He's just barreling forward, hucking shots. He an accurate striker as well, powerful wrestler. But sometimes, he just burned through the gas tank. It was just pedal to the metal the whole time. And, by the end of the first round, he'd be left with nothing. So it was good to see him really measured in this fight. Wasn't as dynamic, perhaps, as some of his other fights. Although Jay Heron, he certainly kept it interesting. It was not an easy fight at all for Ellenberger, I'd say. Heron certainly had his moments. But it was rightfully mostly Ellenberger's fight. And, definitely a good showing by both guys. Classic matchup.
I didn't actually enjoy this fight. I thought it was such a boring fight to watch. There was very little going on. It was like he was doing enough to win, but not doing enough to win impressively. I don't think any guys stopped really raised from this fight. Ellenberger was fighting an opponent who's a lot lower ranked than him. So I think if you're fighting an opponent who's lower ranked, then you need to win impressively. And like I said, I don't think he did that. So I didn't care much for this fight. I was looking forward to the fight because I think Ellenberger is an exciting fighter, but I didn't care much for the fight after watching it.
Kind of have a lot of respect for both guys, actually. I think Ellenberger came off of that crushing loss to Campman. And, when you get
difficulty there, I guess, because everything's running through my system. When my internet dropped out, we lost the entire feed, which was unfortunate. It's kind of weird. When I lived in Gainesville, I didn't have any problems, but here in Chicago, my internet will drop out about every 5 or 6 hours, and unfortunately, we hit one of those dropouts. I'm going to need to call up Comcast and see if there's anything we can do about that. But I believe, Chris, you were about to talk about your take on Ellenberger Heron before we were so rudely interrupted by Comcast.
Yeah, no problem. I was basically just saying that, Jake Ellenberger has been absolutely fantastic in the UFC. He made his debut against Carlos Condit in a very close fight. Condit won split decision. I think Condit deserved to win that fight. But he looked great. He went on a huge win streak, just finishing Jake Shields. dominating Diego Sanchez for 2 rounds, and a couple B and C level fighters he mixed in there. And then he got, for some reason, got destroyed by Martin Kampmann. Completely dominated that first round. And then in the second round, Kampmann hit those couple beautiful tie clinch knees, and Ellenberger kind of rolled over and just kind of gave up. So I feel that this fight, Ellenberger came in very measured. John Anik and Kenny Florian were commenting on how measured and patient Ellenberger was, and that doesn't make for a good fight, to be quite honest. I think it was the best fight ever. I didn't think it was the worst. Jay Heron had a lot riding on it as well. He's been outside of the UFC for, I think, 7 years now and has a 17-3 record outside of that. So you have 2 guys who have a lot on the line, and what we got was a very measured performance. Ellenberger obviously won that fight via those elbows from full guard, which opened up Heron, and he had 2 takedowns. So this fight was basically won on 3 different factors: couple elbows, couple takedowns. It wasn't the best ever. Heron will definitely get another fight in the UFC, and I think that Ellenberger will probably get a decent opponent, but he didn't really razzle and dazzle with his last performance.
Yeah, that's a pretty good synopsis of it. Heron, I think there are a few game welterweights in the UFC who just lost. I would actually a guy who's pretty similar to him as far as fighting styles and him coming into the UFC. Brian Ebersol, I think Heron versus Ebersol would be pretty interesting. And as far as Ellenberger goes, obviously there's a list of names coming in. You know what? I'm actually going to throw out 2 possible opponents. Ellenberger is coming off that loss to Martin Kampmann before he won this fight. Maybe the winner of Damian Maia versus Rick Story, upcoming at UFC 153. That would be a pretty interesting scrap. Maybe if Koscheck is able to come back from his injury, we finally see Koscheck Ellenberger. If this news about Strikeforce being finally completely absolved into the UFC is true, I'd love to see Jake Ellenberger take on Strikeforce champion Nate Marquardt. That would be pretty interesting on its own. What do you guys think about those?
I totally agree. I think that's a really awesome matchup, especially Ellenberger and Marquardt. If that could get made, I mean, obviously Mark always excited, so is Ellenberger. So if these Strikeforce rumors are it's a great matchup, so like both, and hopefully they get matched up. I'd also like to see Jay Heron perhaps still kind of stay in the echelon of the UFC division as well. I mean, he showed that he definitely belongs hanging tough with Jake Ellenberger. So let's see if he's legit or not, and give him a opponent. Maybe a Claude Patrick or Tyron Woodley if he were to come over. Someone along those lines.
I like the idea of Tyron Woodley, Jake Ellenberger. I think that would be a good fight. Obviously, Tyron Woodley's got a very tough defeat to Nate Marquardt. I think he looked quite good in that, even though he lost, he looked good. Jay Heron, I don't know, it's hard to say to us because I wasn't that impressed with him, to be honest with you. Patrick said the name earlier on. When we talk about the opponent, he mentioned Jay Heron, Josh Neal. Mind seeing that fight? I find it very hard to get excited for Jay Heron after that, to be honest with you.
Chris?
As far as opponents, let's look at Ellenberger. He had a 6 or 7 fight win streak. Help me out, guys. I don't have my facts ahead of me. Six fight win streak. So you're looking at a guy who went 6-1 in his last 7, and who he actually faced off. You know what? I'm going to go back to my old stomping ground. I say if Matt Brown wins against Mike Swick, let's do Brown versus Ellenberger. I think Brown, if he wins dominating against Mike Swick, I feel that Brown needs a real step up in competition, and both of those guys bring it. So I'm going to say Matt Brown if he gets by Mike Swick.
Wow, that would be a tremendous step up for Matt Brown. And I'm not exactly sure how good the audio is coming through. It might be a little bit scratchier than normal because I'm operating on my landlord's internet right now, who's conveniently located a story beneath me because I didn't want to wait for my own internet to take the 5-minute process of rebooting itself, etc. So yeah, let's move on to that main event fight. We had Antonio Silva beat down Travis Brown 327 in the first round by TKO. Unfortunately, the main reason why Brown was put away so early was he suffered a injury early on, so really didn't get to see the full package out of Travis Brown. But Silva still looked pretty impressive. Especially coming off those losses that he faced against Cain Velasquez and Daniel Cormier, but you can't really hold losses against those guys too much against Silva. Those are two of the top guys, and before that he had his career signature victory against Fedor, which was very, very good. What did you guys think of that fight, Chris?
You know what? I'm going to pull the wild card here and say I was absolutely pissed off at this fight. I feel that if you're a referee... What? Sorry, you broke up. What was that?
I was quoting Ray. I was saying, "Gutted."
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. I was absolutely pissed off at this fight. There was a moment where Travis Brown threw a punch and his knee buckled. And then for the fight, for another, I think, a minute and a half or so, he was dancing around. Obviously, wasn't able to, properly off his shots. If I was the referee in that fight, I would have stepped in and pulled Travis Brown aside and said, "Do you think you can fight?" And if he said yes, I would have pulled the doctor in and said, "Do you think he can fight?" And I would have made a real good effort to make sure that somebody can actually fight. This is a mixed martial arts competition in a steel cage with thousands of people in attendance and, maybe a couple million more watching it. And I just really don't have any idea why the referee didn't step in and make sure he could defend himself. I mean, he was hobbling around. If you have one good leg, you should be fighting someone else. Regardless of heart or grit or how much we think these guys can actually fight through it, I had absolutely no respect for that call on all the parties. So I think that Antonio Bigfoot Silva did well to finish Travis Brown, but I don't really put too much stock into that finish, considering that Travis Brown was a one-weight fighter, and for a heavyweight who moves lightweight, that's a death sentence.
Yeah, Chris, you bring up a slew of great points there. I know when I was watching that fight, you could see his knee kind of torque. And, the subsequent limping, it was very evident he had an injury. And, if that was evident to us watching on TV, well, wouldn't you think the guy standing in the cage would have a better view, would be more able to pick up on something like that? And like you would notice, or like you had mentioned, wouldn't he notify the ringside doctor? That's just, it's fighter safety. Having said that, though, the fight in and of itself, it started out very interesting before that point. I love seeing Travis Brown throwing spinning wheel kicks. It's not very often you see a 6'7" heavyweight go for one of those. And he came very close to landing. It was very interesting. This was going to be Travis Brown's first real big test, since the Czech Congo fight, which went to a draw. Because of a Congo point deduction. So I'm disappointed in the way it ended. It was a great fight on Bigfoot Silva's part. He did what he was there to do. He finished the fight, just landed a spectacular, huge right hand and followed it up with some good ground and pound. Fortunately, Herb Dean had the awareness to stop it in a decent amount of time, so at least he was on point in that respect. There wasn't really too much in the way of unnecessary blows to Travis. But yeah, it's always unfortunate when you're watching a fight and it ends with a TKO injury like that, just like we saw a couple weekends ago with I can't speak, with Dwayne Ludwig's fight. It's just never really how you want things to play out. We want to see the fighters win or lose in spite of their own performances as opposed to their bodies giving out.
There was talking about you mentioned the Dwayne Ludwig fight, but there was another fight as well, probably about 6 weeks ago, which went similar way to Silver Brown. One guy had a really bad leg injury and he carried on fighting with one leg. It was in the UFC. Do any of you remember which fight it was?
I actually remember. I think it was. Sorry,
Jared
go
ahead, Patrick.
Oh no, yeah, that was
right.
I believe.
Jared Hammond and Michael Quaper, yeah. Going into this fight, I felt that Silver was going to get the TKO victory because I don't know. I thought Brown was overhyped. He didn't look very good against Rob Broughton, and Rob Broughton's not a very good guy. Silver's got losses to Cormier and Cain Velasquez, but I don't take too much negative from them two because them two guys are such good fighters. I just thought Silver was going to be too powerful. Obviously, it probably didn't end the way we would have liked with the injury, but I thought that was going to go that way anyway, and I had Silver to win. I'd gone for round 2, TK, but it was obviously round 1. But yeah, it played out the way I thought it was going to play out.
Yeah, and as far as who these guys should take on next, Travis Brown, he was undefeated going into this. Now he has 1 loss and 1 draw on his record. I'd like to see him take on the fighter he has that 1 draw to, Chick Congo. They fought at UFC 120, I think, right about 2 years ago, and that was ruled 28-28 across the board after Congo had 1 point deducted in the 3rd round for repeatedly grabbing Travis Brown's shorts. I think that would be interesting. Both guys have come along quite a bit in the last 2 years. As far as Antonio Silva goes, I have two possible fights to throw out there. If Strikeforce, if the merger takes place later than sooner, it would be a pretty interesting fight to see a guy who lots of fans were calling to get a title shot, Mark Hunt. That would be pretty interesting. A couple big dudes scrapping in the octagon. But if Strikeforce is absolved into the UFC sooner rather than later, I think a couple guys who've been tossed around by Daniel Cormier would be a pretty interesting fight. Josh Barnett versus Antonio Silva. I'd like to see that one. Chris?
Yeah, I've definitely got a intriguing fight for Brown when he comes back after this injury. I say Stipe Miocic. He was on a decent win streak in the UFC, undefeated until he fell to Stefan Struve. So I think as far as styles go, that'd be great. Brown is a little shorter than Struve, and Miocic had some success against Stefan Struve, who's obviously very tall. I think that would be an awesome matchup. As far as Bigfoot, me personally, I don't put too much stock into him winning this fight. He beat a injured fighter who injured himself. It's not like he kicked, Travis Brown in the leg 30 times and Travis Brown was hobbling. If that had happened, I'd give a lot of stock into Bigfoot Silva, but he's lost to guys like, he lost to Fabricio Verdum in Strikeforce. He lost to Daniel Cormier. He got dominated by Velasquez. I don't really have too much stock in Bigfoot, so I'd like to see him face a mid-tier guy at heavyweight. And if Shane Carwin gets past Roy Nelson, I'd like to see Bigfoot face the winner of that fight. Either way, if it's Big Country or Carwin, I think that's a good matchup.
And for myself, I'd like to see Bigfoot Silva take on Stefan Struve, the main event winner of last week's UFC card. Timing-wise, it makes sense. Of course, they're both coming off victories a week apart. Struve took a little more damage in that one than Bigfoot did in his fight, so he may need a little bit to heal up. Who knows? Maybe he came through with nothing major. I think that'd be a good test for both fighters. Struve, I think he's at a 4-fight win streak right now, which may seem incongruent to Antonio Silva and what he's done lately. But at the same time, when you look at the list that Chris has mentioned of fighters that Antonio Silva has losses to, it's pretty much just the cream of the crop. I mean, Daniel Cormier, Cain Velasquez, those are, very, very good guys. And of course, he has a win over Fedor Emelianenko, who's widely regarded as one of the greatest mixed martial artists and heavyweight fighters of all time. So I think that'd be good. It'd be good to see where both these guys really stand in the division. And as for Travis Brown, I'd like to see him take on, maybe someone like a LeVar Johnson if he heals up quickly enough. I think that'd be a good comeback for both fighters.
Looking at the fights I'd like to see, they've all been mentioned, but I'm just going to kind of say the ones I wanted, even though they've already been mentioned. But for Travis Brown, my first thought was Stipe Miocic. They're both, had the one loss. They're both the one loss recently. I think that'd be a good fight. I think it'd be a good stand-up fight. I think if I was to pick that fight, I think I'd be leaning towards Travis Brown. We don't know how long Brown's going to be out for. We don't know how his leg injury is. But that's the fight. That's the first fight that comes to mind for me. And for Antonio Silva, I was looking at the guys that General mentioned. I was either looking at Stefan Struve, which makes loads of sense because they're both coming off big wins just now, or Antonio Silva versus the winner of Nelson and Carwin, which again has been mentioned. But they're the fights that stood out to me.
For sure, it'll really be kind of intriguing to see what matchups the UFC gives those guys in the main and co-main events as we move forward. Looks like we're getting toward the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for bearing with us. This was our first podcast, hopefully of many on Ustream. Didn't really have many issues with Ustream. Like I mentioned earlier, the only real issue was my physical internet getting knocked off, so I'll have to call up Comcast, give them a sob story, something, because, you aren't paying internet to get booted off. Definitely tune in. The MMA Roundtable is going to be every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, midnight for our UK listeners. That's on Monday night. Next week, we will be back to cover UFC 153, Silva vs. Bonner, and I'll pass it off to Ray one more time to plug MMAmental.com.
Yeah, if you just a reminder, I shouted out at the start of the show. We've got a great show lined up this week. We've managed to get some great guests. They've all said they're going to be on. We just need to obviously confirm all the little details. But we're going to open up the show with Lockdown MMA, which is a promotion that we will be covering this weekend. We're going to go to the event and be reporting live from the event, and we're going to get some of their fighters on. And then I've got 4 of the guests lined up after that. We've got a UFC veteran, Jess Leardon, who fights out of the UK, and had a good little run in the UFC. Pride Fighting Championship veteran Enson Inoue, who actually fought in an early UFC, so I think it was UFC 12 he fought in, but he made his name more in Pride. And then two guys off the current UFC roster, Seth Brzezinski, coming off of his big win recently over Simone Thorson, and Joey Beltran coming off of his fight against James Tahuna. He lost the fight, but he showed a ton of heart in that fight.
A tune of heart. So definitely go on MMA Mental, check them out, subscribe to them on iTunes, really good stuff. If you want to hear our podcast, we actually do a live show Wednesdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We were going to have Nate Corey on last week before BTR kind of screwed us over, so hopefully we can reschedule that for this week. And like I mentioned at the top of the show as well, really pumped to have Joey Coco Diaz on. Maybe the most, that is going to be amazing. Herb Mazzagatti, cocksucker. We'll have Michael Schiavello on, probably the most well-known MMA commentator outside of the UFC. Check us out Wednesday nights, Twitter at the MMA Podcast, website, obviously, themmapodcast.com. And, most of all, thank you guys so much for tuning in. You make it worthwhile. So, until either if you're going to listen to us this Wednesday live, or you're going to check us out next Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, we gone.
Peace.